Hello and welcome to News in Depth on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Ukraine is preparing to present a revised peace plan to the United States, a plan reportedly cut from 28 to 20 points after intense talks with European leaders. Kyiv is under mounting pressure from Washington to accept a deal that may require painful compromises, while President Zelensky insists Ukraine cannot give up territory and is even considering wartime elections if security can be guaranteed. With diplomacy accelerating and battlefield realities tightening, what does this mean for Ukraine's future? Well, to address that question, we're joined by Marcin Zaborowski, the Europe editor, TVP World. Marcin, great to have you back. Thanks for taking the time.
Great for having me, thank you.
So, okay, you know, President Zelensky's been running around all over Europe talking to leaders. They've been together, it seems, working on this new 20-point plan. What do you think has been cut out?
Well, I think all these points which Ukrainians seem to be very unhappy about, especially those who concern territorial concessions, but also very importantly for us, for Poland, the point, I think, number 9, which concerned Poland and the stationing of European fighter jets on our territory. We know that this point is out. It may sound kind of benevolent that, you know, to have European fighter jets, but it actually means no American fighter jets.
Right, so they'd be replaced.
So, no, I mean, this point is gone.
Right, yeah, no, they would have been replaced.
Yeah, but, so we know that in the new version of plan, this point is gone. Everything concerning the territorial concessions, whether in Zaporizhia or in Donbass, it's gone. Perhaps also the point concerning the size of Ukrainian armed forces. When it was tapped at 600,000, Ukrainians wanted it to be at least 800,000. So maybe they raise it up, or they just got rid of this point altogether. So I expect these kind of changes to be there. Basically, all these points which were kind of positioning this plan as more as surrender rather than a peace proposal.
Right. Now, there is a soundbite that I'd like to share with you and get your view on it, and that should be coming up now.
I am glad that we have involved them. 3 documents. The first is a framework document with 20 points, which is constantly changing, and that is normal, a living structure that must correspond with the interests of Ukraine, Europe and the world. The second document concerns security guarantees. I am awaiting relevant proposals from our military and their discussions with the Americans, and all this must be combined with the position of the coalition of the willing. The third document concerns the reconstruction of Ukraine. Some say this is Ukraine's economic development. This is reconstruction. Of course, this is a project that will begin when the war ends or there is a ceasefire.
Okay, so there are a number of points that he made there. Let's start with the coalition of the willing. How involved have the European governments been in working this new peace plan out?
Very. To say the least. The new plan is coming out of the meeting of President Zelensky with the leaders of France, United Kingdom and Germany. They met in London day before yesterday, and only after this meeting, President Zelensky announced there is a new plan. So clearly, the 3 European leaders, they had a major input into what is acceptable, what can be presented to the Americans as a new proposal. So that's not to be underestimated, and it's also the leaders of these 3 countries which are offering potential troops contributions in case there is a peace agreement and there is a stabilization forces needed in Ukraine to guarantee peace.
Right. Okay. So we understand now why the European countries are so engaged, and of course they're also providing Ukraine with materiel, military and otherwise. And so yes, you can understand this being a joint effort. The other thing he mentioned in that little soundbite was security guarantees.
Yes.
Now clearly this is a moot point with Russia saying, well, Ukraine cannot join NATO. So what kind of security guarantees do you think might be effective?
I think at this point in time, Ukrainians no longer believe that NATO membership is a viable option. We also heard it actually on paper in the last American National Security Strategy, which came out only 2 or 3 days ago, which said, we no more NATO enlargement. So that point is kind of gone. Yeah? So the only way that security could be guaranteed for Ukraine is through a sort of a tripwire presence of European troops on the ground in Ukraine in some major locations. It doesn't have to be a lot of those troops, but it needs to be a situation whereby Russia could no longer attack the country without the fear of actually killing some NATO troops and in effect drawing NATO, European nations into the conflict. So that's
how much of a deterrence is that to Putin? Because he has said in the past, hasn't he, that the presence of troops from other countries basically means that those countries are at war with Russia, and they would respond accordingly.
Well, Putin seemed to react positively to the former 28-point plan, which the Americans presented, which seemed to be translated from the Russian, by the way. And that 28-point plan did foresee a presence of European stabilization force in Ukraine. So that means that that Russia is aware that Ukraine would not just sign some kind of a paper and not be satisfied with any sort of security guarantees for its sake.
Now, the countries that you mentioned, not NATO, but other countries' troops. Now, there has been much talk about the growth of the European military industry, the armaments industry. A good example would be the SAFE funding provided by the European Union, for this purpose, and Poland is one of the biggest recipients of that. So are we talking about the use of that kind of funding to build up a NATO lookalike in the EU?
No, I don't think that the European nations are rushing to replace NATO with anything. I think that there is a very strong belief in Europe that the best guarantee of European security is the continuation of NATO, with America at its helm, and with America basically being in a possession of strategic enablers which the Europeans don't have. So we know that the entire European defense industry can produce enough missiles for Ukraine to last for 1 month. And I'm talking about all of the European nations. So the Europeans are changing it. They are ramping up the investment in defense industry. There are no new factories coming up, but still it takes time. And at this point in time, the European defense industrial capability is insufficient. It's insufficient to deter Russia, and it's insufficient to provide the aid that Ukraine needs to continue to defend itself against Russia.
Right. So there does need to be a major U.S. element. Now, let's assume this all comes to pass. We have European troops in Ukraine. How much of a guarantee is it? I mean, Russia is quite well known for breaking previous security agreements. For example, the agreement to respect Ukraine's borders, well, quite clearly has been ignored by this full-scale invasion. Would that be enough to stop Russia, in your opinion?
Well, to be honest, I mean, we can only speculate on the topic.
Yeah.
But we have some grounds for optimism with that. Some grounds for optimism because I think that Russia has been careful not to draw the alliance into the conflict. For example, it could be very tempting for Russia to attack the hub in Rzeszów in Poland, which is delivering aid to Ukraine. Without that hub, Ukraine would be defenseless. It could be, in Russian strategic thinking, could be a very obvious thing to do, had it not been for the fact that it's a tightly protected airport at the NATO territory. The same thing we might say about some strategic cities in locations in the Baltic states, which Russia could very easily overrun. Moreover, locations which are predominantly populated by Russian speakers. For example, the city of Narva in Estonia. 85% of the population of that city is Russian speakers. Estonia does not have a sufficient defense to protect itself against a possible Russian incursion to extend its territory to the city of Narva. Right. Still, Russia hasn't done it. So that means that Russia is taking NATO, at this point in time, is believing in NATO cohesion, is believing that NATO is a kind of organization that it doesn't want to see the response of it.
Right. Well, although it hasn't stopped Russia from carrying out hybrid attacks on European countries.
Because they fall below the threshold of what is called the Article 5 threshold. Article 5 for calling for collective defense.
Yep. So
once this threshold is being crossed, NATO has to mobilize and to basically start preparing for war. NATO has been unclear about what constitutes grounds for attack or not, and whether a sabotage on the territory of Poland is a sufficient grounds for that. And because of its unclarity, Russia has been pushing and testing and waiting to see how NATO would react.
Yeah, so NATO paralysis as a result of a lack of clarity in the definition of Article 5. Let's move on now to the third part of the plan that President Zelensky referred to in that soundbite, and that was the reconstruction post-war commitments. Now, much has been said about freezing Russian assets mostly in Belgium, and using those assets as security for a loan, which would be used for that purpose. What do you think that element of the plan looks like?
Well, I think it's President Zelensky said there are three elements of a new plan. So number one, 28-point plan became 20-point plan because things that Ukrainians couldn't accept were getting rid of for now. Then number two, it's about the security guarantees, and number three, it's about the reconstruction. So I would imagine that this part of reconstruction contains some very clear formulations on how the frozen assets, the Russian frozen assets, how they can be and should be used to the reconstruction of Ukraine. Let's also remind people that President Trump, in his 28-point plan, thought that Russia and America should be jointly sharing among themselves, these frozen assets and being very engaged in the post-war reconstruction. Most of these assets, all of these assets are at the territory of Europe, so it looks to me like a sort of a money grab on behalf of President Trump.
So you think there might be some backroom dealings between Trump and Putin on what happens after?
I have no doubt about it. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So basically, some kind of commercial arrangement between the two. Okay. Well, yes. Well, that's of course entirely possible. The other interesting thing I found was, Trump is making a big deal about supplying weapons to Ukraine, but he's not actually giving them to Ukraine. He's selling them to Ukraine.
He's selling it's all done on a commercial basis. Only a few days back, Poland announced its contribution to arms buying for Ukraine, whereby Poland will be contributing 100 million euro to buy necessary equipment in America to give to Ukraine. And Polish announcement came together in one package together with Norway and Germany. The value of the entire package is $500 million. It's not making a huge difference, but it's meaningful. So lots of Europeans are doing that. And the value of military support from Europeans have really grown in the last year and a half. Unfortunately, the American aid to Ukraine has substantially declined. So overall, Ukraine is getting less than it was getting 2 or 3 years ago.
Right, yes. Well, again, quite hazy what President Trump's plans are. I want to move on to the area of territorial concessions. But before we do, a short soundbite.
According to Ukrainian law, our constitution and international law, we have no moral right to do so either. Russia is insisting that we give up territory, but we definitely do not want to give anything up. That is what we are fighting for, as you well know. The Americans are looking for a compromise today, to be frank.
Right. Well, Zelensky's been consistent throughout, and he's said exactly that from the beginning. Yes. No territorial concessions. It's morally wrong. The Ukrainian people would never accept it, and it's in the constitution. Mm-hmm. So we seem to be at an impasse here, because Russia is, of course, insisting on holding on to the land they've already occupied. What next?
Well, there are some areas where President Zelensky is, however, signaling willingness to compromise. For example, the 28-point plan was calling for election to be organized, held in Ukraine within 100 years after the reaching the peace agreement.
100 days.
100 days. 100 years will be
100
long.
years would be good as well. But
so within and essentially President Zelensky is saying we can do that, as long as the security guarantees are workable. I don't wish to cling to power if that's not what people want. If people want me to continue, okay, but if not, not. But I mean, on this point, Ukraine is saying, and President Zelensky is saying, we are ready to compromise, which seems extraordinary. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, Ukraine is a victim here. And the aggressor is telling the victim to hold the election. And the victim is saying eventually, okay, we might do that. President Zelensky wants to say that he's ready to compromise, that he's ready to move on, that if that's so important to Russia, okay, let's be it. But he's also saying, I'm not going to give up on the territory of my country. Let's see whether that moves the needle a little bit. I think it should. And essentially, President Zelensky is now also equipped with a very strong argument saying that it's not about me. It's not about me clinging to power, which is, he was accused of that by both President Trump and President Putin. They were both saying, oh, Zelensky just wants to remain a dictator forever. Yeah? And now he's saying, no, I'm ready to compromise. I'm ready to stand for election.
It's more than that. They're even considering changes to the law to allow elections during the war,
yes.
And whether that happens or not. And of course, there are risks with doing that. It's very difficult to, for everyone to vote when there are bombs flying over your head. And what about the soldiers, on the front line? How do we get their votes in? But so that's a whole can of worms in its own right. But you believe that President Zelensky is saying that, fine, I'll it's not about me, I'll hold elections after the war. You think that's going to make a difference to Russian demands for territory? Because it seems that Putin's own main concern, really, is grabbing hold of the resource-rich areas of Donbass and so on.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I don't think that it's going to convince the Russians. But I think that they wanted several things. election was a minor part of it, really.
Right. Yeah.
It was all about controlling the territory of Ukraine as much as they can. But having said that, vis-à-vis the Americans now, President Zelensky is having a very strong argument. He's saying, look, it's not like that I don't wish to compromise. There are areas in which I can meet the Russians. I can actually submit myself to the election. There could be another leader. It's not about me. So morally, I think it's a very strong argument that he's putting out there, and that's important. And he's also saying that he cannot compromise on the land because it's in the constitution.
Right.
I don't think that the Russians will accept that, but we are in negotiations. That's very important to remember, that all of this process is negotiations.
Yes.
So it started badly because it started with Americans essentially accepting the Russian plan as their own. The Ukrainians have struggled to respond with the support of Europeans. Now they found a way to respond. Also, with meeting some of these demands that the Russians and the Americans have proposed together. But it's a process. It's a process. And we also see now that some in Ukraine, for example, within the Ukrainian opposition, are saying, well, let's be realistic about it. Russians are where they are. Maybe we would need to compromise on some land too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that surprises me somewhat is that President Trump is talking about, the need for elections when Zelensky was elected democratically, fair and free elections.
In a landslide.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, Marcin. So much more to talk about. Let's hopefully continue this soon. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.